saw in the House when it comes to things like SALT, when it comes to Medicaid and so forth, when it comes to green incentives. If you have solar stocks, you know what I'm talking about. We spoke about this with Congressman French Hill, the chair of the House Financial Services Committee, on the late edition of Balance of Power, knowing there are huge differences between these two versions. Here's what he said.
There's room in the spending proposals for Senate review and Senate changes. But it's not like you're going to tear the whole house down and build a new house. Mike Johnson and Leader Thune are working hand in glove with the Trump administration. I hope the Senate can make progress so that we can deliver that bill to President Trump before Independence Day in just a few days.
Yes, sir. That's the deadline still, the 4th of July. That's when Nathan Dean sets off the fireworks, and he's with us right now. Of course, senior policy analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence and our guide through the darkness here when it comes to reconciliation. Great to see you, sir. So they dropped the Senate finance version. Everybody's upset. Wouldn't want to be a SALT Republican right now. Wouldn't want to be a solar investor right now. Let's start there because these solar stocks are going through hell today. What just happened?
Yeah, so, I like to call that these solar stocks have hot sauce. I used to say that with marijuana stocks.
Yeah.
Now it's the solar stocks. Call that these solar stocks have hot sauce. I used to say that with marijuana stocks.
Yeah.
Now it's the solar stocks.
Yes.
Because on Friday, most of these stocks, we're talking like First Solar, Enphase, Sunrun, Solar Edge, they were up 10, 15, 20% on Friday. Yeah. And then on Monday night, we get this language with the solar tax credits were actually more aggressive than what the House had gone in terms of phasing out. Okay. Now, most of these will phase out by 2028. Under the Inflation Reduction Act, we were looking at 2031. Now, the other thing here to keep in mind is that, the IRA was actually more beneficial to things like nuclear, geothermal, hydropower. But for these solar stocks in particular, we're seeing companies down 30, 40% today.
Right.
Because, and this is the note that we just put out a few hours ago, or actually just about an hour ago, I'm not sure that the moderate relief for the Inflation Reduction Act is going to be coming when they get to the full Senate debate. Because yes, you will hear senators talking about, debates over Medicaid, SALT, and so forth like that.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the Inflation Reduction Act, Senator Tom Tillis said he was generally supportive or generally satisfied. And to me,
that was your troublemaker.
That was my troublemaker. And so I actually think that, when this bill becomes very close to final, I think it's going to look very similar for these clean energy tax credits to where the Senate Finance Committee dropped it.
As opposed to, say, SALT, they didn't really commit to something here, right? It says $10,000, but we're told it's a placeholder. What's the exercise room here?
I think there's some pretty angry senators at the moment. And what I mean by that is that the Senate usually has its way with the House. Mm-hmm. And the Senate says, look, House Representatives, you're going to take this and you're going to like it. There is no desire to increase that $10,000 cap of the SALT amongst those Senate Republicans. If they had their way, they'd probably just go to zero. Mm-hmm. But they have to recognize the fact that there is a salty caucus in the House.
Yeah. And
if I'm Representative Lawler and I'm, one of those Long Island Republicans that's really fighting for this, I'm going to tell the Senate, no deal. Now, I think they could potentially come down to like $30,000. So we're telling our clients, look, that $30,000 to $40,000. Right. But look, with the margin of, votes in the House of Representatives so thin as it is, if that salty caucus tells the Senate, look, no deal, we're not going to negotiating. Ultimately, I think the Senate Republicans are going to have to bend on that, and that's why we think
that's what they're saying, right?
Yeah, that's why we think the SALT deductions are going to be around that $30,000 to $40,000.
Interesting. Wow. So that goes back to where we were. How about Medicaid? This is another huge sticking point on the House side. The Senate digs in even further.
Yeah, exactly. So the Senate went a little bit more aggressive. Our colleague Dwayne Wright put out a note early this morning, essentially that he thinks that the Senator Josh Hawleys of the world, those that are concerned about the scale of the Medicaid cuts, are going to win this fight, and we are going to see a mitigation factor, especially when it comes to the provider tax.
That's what we're talking about here.
Exactly. And so I think what you'll see is the next couple of weeks, and we think that Senator John Thune wants to have a vote potentially as soon as next week. I don't think it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. I think the Senate vote's going to come probably right after the 4th of July. And between now and then, I think you're going to see the debate over two things. One, Medicaid cuts, and we think that's going to be scaled back, be a little bit more favorable. And second is going to be the deficit.
Okay.
You're going to see the Senator Ron Johnsons of the world come out there and say that we're not happy about the deficit, but he also included language just a couple of days ago that we're getting on the right path.
Fascinating. Okay, so we're asking Ron Johnson to come and talk to us a little bit later on. That's where you start the conversation here, right? Because the senator is pointing everybody to debt and deficits. And we just found out that permanence is in fact going to be in the bill when it comes to the 3 business tax breaks that we talked about. So this money's got to come out of something. That's why they're looking at SALT and other areas to make the difference, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, this entire process that they're going through is like my son's carnival toy, where if you squeeze it in multiple directions, you can't ever get it to be equal, you know, and I'm trying to get rid of that toy. But, you know, the challenge that Senator Johnson has is because, look, if he comes out and says to Senator Thune, I'm not supporting this unless you cut more, well, Senator Hawley's like, well, look, I'm not going to support it unless you cut less. And so, you know, ultimately, that's why we always go back to this idea that the deficit is the most likely impacted here, because it's much easier for these senators to say, and for these members of the House, that I'm going to vote on something that President Trump just wants me to vote and be done with it, that ultimately impacts the deficit in 5 to 10 years, than it is to vote for something where my constituencies will be harmed potentially as soon as next year.
Are the SALT Republicans the only members of the Republican caucus, the Republican conference, I should say, who are a no vote if they don't get what they want? In other words, allow the Trump tax cuts to expire. That's a pretty rare breed on Capitol Hill. The conventional wisdom is no one actually is going to vote against this bill because you're going to be voting for a massive tax hike.
So I may be a little bit out of consensus here.
Let me know.
We saw language from Representative Chip Roy saying that he's a no.
Okay.
But I go back to the continuing resolution fight from March. There were a lot of no's until President Trump got in there and said, are you going to derail my efforts?
Right.
And then they became yeses. But if I'm Representative Lawler, or if I'm a member from the Long Island Republicans, or if I'm outside of New York City,
Yes.
it's not like you're going to get a MAGA Republican to primary me. You know, a lot of these districts, Senator Gillibrand won as well.
So they have enormous leverage.
They have enormous
leverage. And the White House
leverage.
knows this.
And Matt Miller even said on Bloomberg TV this morning that if you aren't going to vote for this, you're not going to get reelected. Now, you know,
Right.
So I just take that to be that I think that these salty Republicans are going to really stick. And that's why I think that they may give up 10,000. But if they go to 30,000 and the Senate Republicans say, let's meet at 30, then I think they take the deal.
If you want Matt Miller's vote, 30,000. You just got it from Nathan Dean at Bloomberg Intelligence. Genius Act. It's going to pass today.
Yes. So the Genius Act, this is a stablecoin issuer bill. It's been going through.
This is a big deal.
Look for the vote around 4:30. It passed cloture 68-30 on Friday. Significant Democratic support. I think this passes fairly easily. I think those Democrats that voted for it on Friday show up again today. And then it goes to the House. Now, the House has 2 choices. They can alter the bill. And there has been some rumblings about potentially altering this bill to allow stablecoin issuers to pay interest. So if I give you $10, then you can pay me interest based off of that $10. Right now, that's prohibited in the Genius Act.
I see.
I think the House, though, even though they're talking about it, I think the House takes the easiest solution to say, we're just going to pass the Senate bill and get it out of here and get it to the president's desk.
What happened to the credit card, guys? The swipe fee bill.
Yeah, so Senator Marshall
This was the big dark cloud hanging over this.
They tried to attach the Credit Card Competition Act to it. As soon as Senator Marshall did that, Senator Hawley's like, whoa, wait. I'm going to attach my bill that caps credit card interest rates at 10%. And next thing you know, you had an enormous amount of amendments being attacked. Senator Thune, I think, and I obviously don't want to speak for the senator, but I think got somewhat frustrated by it, said, I'm wiping the amendment tree clean. We're going to put on a new amendment tree. No more amendments. Let's just pass this thing.
Incredible. Wow. This is how the sausage is made. This is why we love spending time with Nathan Dean. Many thanks to you. Keep your eyes. Genius Act, as Nathan said, about 4:30 p.m. Eastern time, we expect to vote in the Senate. We've got some breaking headlines here.